The history of science is filled with fascinating hoaxes and frauds. Here are some notable ones. Piltdown Man. Perhaps the most famous scientific fake, the Piltdown Man was a collection of jaw and skull fragments discovered by one Charles Dawson in the United Kingdom between 1911 and 1912. It was purportedly a missing link between apes and humans. However, in 1953, this discovery was exposed as a hoax. The skull was actually constructed from a medieval human skull attached to the jaw of an orangutan sporting the fossilized teeth of a chimpanzee. The Cardiff Giant was one of the most famous archaeological hoaxes in American history. In October 1869, a 10-foot, 3,000-pound petrified man was unearthed on a small farm in Cardiff, New York. The Cardiff Giant became a huge news story and a huge paying attraction. The giant was the creation of George Hull. Hull, an atheist, got into an argument with a Methodist preacher about a passage in the Bible which states that there were giants who once lived on Earth. Hull wanted to prove how easily he could fool people with a fake giant. Hull hired men to quarry a 10-foot block of gypsum in Iowa and then hired 2 sculptors in Chicago to carve the giant. In November 1868, Hull transported the giant by railroad to the farm of his cousin, William Newell, in New York. By then, he had spent the equivalent to $60,000 in today's money on the hoax. As it turned out, the hoax was a good investment. Some months later, he sold his interest in the giant for over $500,000 in today's money. Some believed the giant was a petrified man, while some believed it was a statue. Those who believed it was a petrified man thought it was one of the giants mentioned in the Bible, King James Version Genesis 6-4. Other experts declared that it could not be a fossilized man, but hypothesized that it was a statue carved by a French Jesuit in the 16th or 17th century to overawe Native Americans. On December 10, 1869, Hull proudly confessed everything to the press, saying that he always intended for the hoax to be exposed to reveal the tendency of people to believe in things too easily. Fossil forgery has a long history dating back to the 18th century and is still occurring today. There was big money to be made selling fossil specimens to private collectors and museums. The first alleged fossil of an avian dinosaur was sold for the modern equivalent of $108,000 in the 1860s. It was a fake. More recently, in 2019, the fossil of a giant spider found in China turned out to be a poorly preserved crayfish. With the emergence of new technologies, scientists have discovered that unsuspecting natural history museums around the world have counterfeit specimens in their collections. In the late 19th century, when European interest in ancient culture was at its peak, crystal skulls, supposedly of pre-Columbian Aztec or Mayan origin, began to appear in major museums in England and France. It was one, Eugene Boban, an antiquities dealer who opened his shop in Paris in 1870, who is most associated with 19th-century museum collections of crystal skulls. Boban is said to have tried to sell a crystal skull to Mexico's National Museum as an Aztec artifact, but was unsuccessful. Boban later moved his business to New York City. The skull was exhibited at a meeting of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, in New York. It was sold at auction, and bought by Tiffany & Company, who later sold it at cost to the British Museum in 1897. The crystal skull in the Museum of Man in Paris was donated by Alphonse Pinart, an ethnographer who had bought it from Eugene Boban. It was not until the late 20th century that the truth came out. Studies demonstrated that the skulls were manufactured in the mid-19th century. The skulls were crafted in the 19th century in Germany, quite likely at workshops in the town of Idar Oberstein, which was renowned for crafting objects made from imported Brazilian quartz. This type of crystal was determined to be only found in Madagascar and Brazil, and thus unknown to the Aztecs or Maya.